Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sporting Directions, proudly sponsored by Tsunami Teamwear. With me, Tavis Roberts.
And me, Simon Atkinson.
For those of you new to the show, the Sporting Directions podcast is aimed at providing some ideas and guidance for those of you wanting to pursue a career in sport. Over the course of the first series, we'll be interviewing a range of professionals from different areas of sport to share some of their amazing stories. We'll be having them share with us some of their achievements, their struggles, and any advice that they may have for many of you wanting to also pursue a career in sport. Today, we're very happy to welcome Bob Dodd. Bob is the owner and principal instructor at Kent Self-Defense Workshops, where he believes the goal is self-confidence and the vehicle is self-defense. We're excited to have you on our show today. Welcome to you, Bob.
Thanks a lot, Tavis.
Bob, really appreciating the time that you'll give us today. So let us begin. What was a strong memory that led you into a career within the sporting industry?
Okay, so that's a good question, Tavis. I'm glad you asked. I think it was quite a pivotal moment. I've been studying Kyokushin Kai karate, which was founded in the 1960s. It's a very practical style of karate. Some call it bare knuckle karate because the focus is on fighting rather than sports karate or display karate. Back in the UK, what happened, we had a really, really high profile murder of a young woman who was walking back home, and she got murdered, and unimaginable things happened to her. So that night, my wife and my two girls, who were at the time 12 and 14, we sat down, we were talking about it. I said, this is awful, what's happened. And my daughter, the 14-year-old, she's a black belt in Kyokushin. She started when she was 5. She's been doing it for about 10 years. And she's more than capable of handling herself in a situation physically. But what was missing was that mental side of it. Now, she's been tested in tournaments, and she represents England, she represents her club, she goes around the country, and she's used to fighting. But there's that kind of mental element where there's someone actually trying to grab you, to hurt you and do things to you. And then leading on from that conversation, my other daughter, who is a non-martial artist, she had the same fears. She was worried about walking the streets. And my wife also told me, we've been together for 22 years, been married for 16 years. She told me there's one spot when she walks back from work every night, she puts her hand in her bag and grabs a can of hairspray, ready in case someone was to jump out. And my wife knows, she knows self-defense from me. She's learned it, from me, holistically when we've been doing stuff in the house and when I've been training other kids. And, physically she's strong and mentally she's strong. And I'm thinking, if this is a snapshot of what's going on in a family, bearing in mind that I'm a martial artist, I'm very confident. My oldest daughter is a martial artist, she's very confident. My wife and other child are very, very confident. Yet they were scared and really disturbed by the recent events. If this is a snapshot of what's happening in our house, which is a confident house, then I wonder what it's like for other people. So from that, really, the concept of Kent Self-Defense Workshops was formed. I went into a local school. The headmaster wanted to do a focus group to see how many of the year 13s were affected and disturbed by recent events. Now, year 13 in the UK is somewhere around about 17, 18 years old. And there's 10 of them. There's a head girl, the smartest brains of the school in year 13 was there, as long as the senior leadership team. And the principal said to the girls, we've got Bob in today to talk about self-defense. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to. Just put your hands up if you've ever felt threatened physically by a man or have known someone who's been physically threatened by a man and interfered with on any level. Now, that level isn't, a bad level. It could be, any sort of level, from catcalling, placing hands on, just being, that level of sexualization. And every single girl put their hands up straight away, boom. All of them. And the headmaster looked at me, I looked at him and thought, we've got a problem here. And from that meeting, and from the meeting in my family, and from the meeting at the local school, Kent Self-Defense Workshops was born.
That's absolutely fascinating. I mean, we never like hearing about things like murder, for example. If we really put that to one side, this tragedy, this real negative, you've got to found a positive in it. And rather than letting something like that kind of take a hold of a local community, I'm really impressed to hear that someone like yourself, you've taken the initiative to really do something about it. Like a business in any kind of commercial unit, you've seen a need for something and you filled that need. And to be able to kind of move forward and offer something that is very much needed is a fantastic thing that you've done, Bob. One thing I just want to touch up on is I do martial arts myself, and you've touched on something that I think it needs to be discussed a little further, and that is the difference between self-defense and martial arts. And you've touched on that quite well, and how you don't have to be a champion in karate or Muay Thai or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or any other kind of different variation there is to be able to feel confident, to feel protected. And I just wanted to see if you could elaborate a little bit more on those key differences between the martial arts and the self-defense, and how it's important, and how you turn martial arts into a practically purposeful, workable self-defense class for people who feel they need the boost in confidence.
So yeah, it's an interesting question because martial arts over the years has been sanitized, but karate, for example, as a martial art, it's always was designed with an end in mind, and that end is to disable any aggressor. We have a saying in martial arts, and we don't train for ourselves, we train for the ones we love, so we can stand up and protect them if ever we were called upon. But interesting thing about martial arts is that, even in our competitions, which are bare knuckle, full contact and quite fierce, there's an element of protection there. And when we say to the kids on the mat, do not strike the knees or the joints, do not strike the groin, do not strike the eyes, do not rip the lips off them, do not rip the ears off them. That's the kind of things that you say on the competition side, but on the self-defense side, you talk about doing all those things. So the most important thing about self-defense, as I see it, is negating the size and strength disparity. Now, I'm about 5'6". When I used to, before COVID, I used to walk around at about 86 kilograms. I'm now a little bit heavier than that. So it's not about being strong. It's not about being technically great. It's about having the intention behind every technique. So if you are cornered and if you do need to use your techniques, you go for the soft spots of the bodies, because often with size and strength disparity, you're talking that as an obvious disparity, but you're also talking about people on alcohol, people on drugs, and people having their brains altered. Punching someone in the chest isn't really going to cut it. Stabbing someone in the eyes with your fingers is going to cause a great distraction, and then kicking the groin as hard as you can, and then breaking ankles when they're on the floor. They're the sorts of things that will help you get away. And we have this mantra when we're training. We say the first weapon in self-defense is your voice, because you want to shout and get eyes on you and draw attention. Your second most valuable weapon in self-defense is your legs and your feet, because you want to run away as quickly as you can. And what we teach people, we don't teach people how to fight. We teach people how to escape a situation. We teach them situational awareness or spider sense or street sense, so they're not in that situation at all. So they understand when trouble is most likely to happen, what time of day, where, what locations, and by whom, and the different types of predators they could encounter. And then we teach them conflict de-escalation, which is sucking the fight out of somebody and bringing the temperature down of the conversation. If all that fails, we feel like we've failed, because then they have to use the techniques that we've taught them. So the techniques we teach them in any given situation, the only vehicle for them to use them for is to escape.
That's great. Thank you for that. I mean, I already feel we've had a bit of a self-defense lesson in what you've said to us. I like that phrase, not to fight, but to escape. And that's a really important one. Because I mean, with the rise of sports on TV and the media like UFC, you talk about self-defense, especially myself as a teacher, and the students immediately think of fight, and they think about being locked in a cage with someone. But you're absolutely right to make it very clear that it's all about escaping and defending yourself through removing yourself from that environment is a very key one to understand. So thank you very much for that. Now, we have touched on the fact that your company, your kind of career path was inspired by tragedy. But what I want to do is I want to move away from that and look at you as an individual. So my question is really about what inspired you long ago to delve into the world of martial arts?
It's very personal and actually quite unremarkable. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of running. So I ran a couple of marathons and lots of half marathons. That was mine and my wife's happy space. If there was a half marathon somewhere we liked around the country, we'd pick up a tent out, do a half marathon, go out for dinner and come back for the next day. And then we had our children, and then your life pauses. And I think any parent, Tavis and you, Simon, would agree that your life pauses because there are other things that are more important. So my daughter at the time, she was 5 years old. Her cousins went to a Kyokushin karate club, and she wanted to be like her cousins, so she wanted to go. I watched from the bleachers for about 2 months and thought, you know what, I could probably do this. You know, I'm here anyway. So I went from someone who watched it to someone who did it. Wasn't naturally gifted at it by any means. But I was naturally enthusiastic with it. I remember when I did my first grading for red belt, which in our style is about an hour. Black belt takes about 8 hours in our style, and it culminates with about 30 fights, full contact fights. But I remember doing my red belt, and this big gnarly black belt, after I presented my red belt, this big gnarly black belt came up to me, singled me out, said, "Congratulations, well done," and shook my hand. And I think that was the moment for me that I thought, okay, this is a little bit different, because he's acknowledging the fact that no matter where you're at in this particular style of karate, you're here, and that's good enough for many of us martial artists. The fact that you're participating, and then it went from strength to strength. It went from up the grades, and then I started instructing, and then my daughter fell more in love with it, and then we'd go touring off to different tournaments, and then I was invited for my black belt test. Rest is history.
Thanks for your answer, Bob. It sounds like your daughter got into martial arts before you, and that you started your career quite a bit later than what was probably normal. Like, you didn't start as a kid or anything.
No, not at all. No.
Do you think having a late start to something like martial arts, was it a hindrance for you, or were you able to bring other skills that you learnt throughout your life?
Physically, there's a hindrance. I mean, I was about 40 when I started, and after years of running, your hips are like a little bit knackered and your knees are a little bit knackered. But apart from that, no real hindrance, because I was keen, I loved it, and any physical barrier that I may have, I could overcome, with other skills. Yeah, I was a late starter, but it's never too late. The thing about being a black belt is it's your black belt. It's very, very personal. Now, there's some guys in my club who fight, and they're awesome. When I spar with them, they're about 20, 23-year-olds, and they kick me all around the mat. I'm never going to be that good. I'm never going to be as strong as them. I'm never going to be as quick as them. But what I can be is just be there with them, and enjoy the process together. So, their black belt is very different from my black belt, but there's room for everybody within any martial arts.
Just by listening to you talk about martial arts and your karate, it's clear that you have a strong passion for it. And you've already mentioned the achievement of getting your black belt. It's like a couple of times. Would you say achieving your black belt is your biggest accomplishment so far? Or is there something else that you would think as your biggest accomplishment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think anybody who's ever been involved in any sort of I don't want to call sport, because martial arts for me isn't sport. It's Budo. It's something apart from sport. But I think anyone who's ever been associated with any sort of ranking system wants a higher rank. And when you're a black belt, you just find out that your training has finished and now you start your martial arts journey. So all being a black belt is that you've understood and you've demonstrated your knowledge of the syllabus. It doesn't give you superpowers. It just means that you have achieved the rank of no longer being a beginner. But then you find yourself as a black belt being a beginner again, because it's a bit like learning how to drive. Once you get in the first car, then you learn how to drive properly. So for me, getting a black belt, without underwhelming anybody, was never my greatest achievement. My greatest achievement is going in, teaching self-defense, finding these girls and boys, some of them who have been in situations they felt really uncomfortable, having an aha moment and thinking, you know what, this stuff is really good and it's practical, and the fact that here's a bloke who is 5'6" teaching me, and not an ex-Marine with tattoos down his neck and built like a tank, it makes it more achievable and it makes it more believable for them to know that if they're in a situation, as long as they use their techniques with courage, conviction, and they're effective, you just see the light bulbs go off around the room where these kids are thinking, you know what, I can do this. And then you drill to prove, and then you drill to improve. And then you just see this manifestation of confidence, where you had these, wallflowers, a couple of hours ago, and now just chomping on the bit. It's almost as if, a veil is lifted from their eyes, thinking, you know what, I don't have to put up with this anymore. I am capable and I'm enough, and although they never have the intention of using it, they do know that if they had to use it, they'd be in a better position. But one thing I do have to maintain actually is I live in a very, very nice, comfortable world. I've been married for 16 years. I've been with Emma for 23 years, I think. I've got 2 cracking kids. I live in a village in England and life is good. I don't see troubles everywhere. I don't walk down my local town centre and see violence. I see good in everyone, and I'm not a paranoid wreck looking for trouble. And I think once you reach that state, it gives you confidence to know that, if something does come at me or my family, then I can dispatch it and move on and not have any sort of mental hangover, about what I've done. Does that answer that question? I feel like I've gone off on a tangent.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's great to see that enthusiasm come through, because when you started talking about your own experiences, myself and Tavis can see the enthusiasm that in what it is you do. And that's the very reason we're doing this podcast, is to try and give people the opportunity to find their passion and see that their passion can lead to other things. Now, one thing you picked up on, and I love this quote, is you're not a superhero. And I love that quote, because to me, sport, and I tend to say sport in a broad context, I'm talking activity, movement, martial arts within that category. It's fantastic at teaching people skills, life skills. And the life skill you picked up on there was humility. And that obviously then bridges into sportsmanship and confidence and all those other things that come with it. And I'm a fan of a gentleman called Simon Sinek. I don't know if you ever heard of Simon.
Start with a Y.
Yeah. Start with a Y. Start with a Y. He's moving into the start with a who, then the Y. But he was OG. But one of the things he was talking about was climbing that mountain ridge, and you climb to the top and you get over that ridge and you're like, yes, I finished. And then suddenly you find the mountain keeps going. And it's a real kind of symbol of humility, but also that growth mindset, that enthusiasm that we saw from you just then about, right, I'm not finished. I've done one thing, but now I get to move on and challenge myself in a different way. And that brings with it discipline, that brings with it resilience and resourcefulness. And I think that's absolutely key for anyone wanting to go into sport. And I could see you talking about the light bulb moment when people realize that they're more able than they believe they are. I think I could see in your response and how you moved in up in your chair and the smile came on your face that you've experienced that light bulb moment yourself several times. Can you give us an exact moment or an example of when that light bulb moment went off for you?
I can't give you one. I'll give you two moments because I think they're quite important. I know that. I want to give you two examples. In self-defense, when I do the classes, we talk about situational awareness and conflict de-escalation. And you just see the kids go over. They're thinking, oh, great, the school's brought in this bloke to talk about situational awareness and conflict escalation. Now, these are kids who maybe experienced some sort of disturbance before, or they feel scared walking to the bus stop, or they feel nervous outside McDonald's when there's another 6 or 7 lads there. So thinking we don't need to know about situational awareness and conflict escalation because they've kind of lived a lot of their life in fear. And they almost have that they believe they already know that. So what we do when we do the classes, we teach them some really, really good dynamic techniques first. And once we teach them those really quite brutal techniques, we always say that we do bad things to bad people because they can't choose their punishment. And we talk about different levels of aggression and different responses required for different threats. So when we teach them some of these techniques, they're like, oh, okay. And then they start listening to conflict de-escalation. And then they start listening to situational awareness because they know that now they know how to disable somebody, then those tools become really important because then they realize that all of a sudden it's not just about fighting but because I do know how to escape, then I'm more willing to listen to conflict escalation and situational awareness because they already have the answer to the problem. They already know that they can disable someone. So therefore, they're more open to listening to that stuff. And that's the most important stuff I teach them, conflict escalation and situational awareness. But the one of the moments that sticks in mind of me, and this is the second example I wanted to give you, me and my daughters went to a pottery shop and we painted some pottery. And in order for the pottery to be finished, believe me, Tavis and Simon, I'm going somewhere with this. In order for the pottery to be finished, it has to be fired. So there's a week lag between when you do your pottery and when you pick it up. And when I walked in on the day to paint everything with my daughters, this girl, we'll call her Penny, not her real name, by the way. This girl called Penny says, oh, you're Bob, aren't you? And I said, yeah, that's right. She goes, do you remember me? I said, oh, yeah, your name, your face is familiar. She goes, oh, you come to my school to do self-defense. And I went, oh, how was it? She goes, yeah, really good. I didn't do much of it. I was like probably sitting by the wall, not engaging too much. But I loved it and it was really nice. Anyway, so I thanked her for her time. And when we went back the next week, my daughters picked up their little bits of pottery, and in that bag was a handwritten note from this girl called Penny saying that, thanks for coming to my school. I was very, very nervous of situations. I'd been in a situation before where I was abused, and I just took that because that was normal. Now, the inference of the letter wasn't sexually abused, it was physically abused. So she could have been bullied by a father, a stepfather, or a brother. This is conjecture. But the point was, she wrote a letter saying, in the past I have been, abused, and I've never had much confidence. And I just thought that was the way it was. And the way I dealt with it was just to become shy and withdrawn. But since doing your class, I've been a completely different person. And when I was confronted, I used some of the techniques you taught me. And that made me weep. And, my daughters and my wife thought, yeah, it really is pretty worthwhile what you're doing. So, yeah, they're my two moments.
Wow, that was fantastic. I mean, whenever you become a teacher like I am, or an instructor, you always hope that you're making a difference in the world. And you're creating good people, and to hear that you've gotten that handwritten note from that individual, it just shows that in this industry you can make a big difference, and you can really make a difference to an individual's life. And no, well, yeah, fantastic and well done to you for that, Bob. I'm sure Tavis will agree. We hope that we're making a difference with some of the students and the children that we have an opportunity to teach and guide in their development. Now, I just want to shift the focus a little bit. We very much focus on these achievements, but like anything in life, there's always barriers, and there's always things that can kind of make us take a couple of steps back. I just wondered, Bob, has there been any barriers to you achieving what you have today?
Yeah, I think there has been, and it's a collective problem. I think as a martial artist, some of the barriers I've got into going into schools and businesses is they've had people in there before who were ego driven. So they'd go in, and it wasn't about the students; it was about them and their style and just how great they were, and I've had objections before where people have come in and they've either scared the kids by painting this picture that the world is very, very dark, and this is what happens if a gun's pulled out, and this is what happens when a knife is pulled out, and this is what happens if you're sexually assaulted, and they've scared these kids, and it's really very, very uncomfortable. And another problem I've had is with some instructors coming in and being too heavy-handed. The instructors meet two types of people. As an instructor, we meet two different types of people. We meet guys who fight every weekend, and we meet guys who have never been in a fight in their life. And you have to read the room, and you have to take the temperature of the room and find out who you're teaching to. And a lot of other instructors have gone in heavy-handed. They've put on joint locks and manipulations, and they've hurt these kids. That's one of the objections that I'm always batting away about safeguarding. Are you going to come into school and are you going to scare the kids and are you going to beat them up? And the short answer is no. We deliver our workshops with humor, we deliver it with humility, and we deliver our workshops with this is what happens if you come across this situation. And we're very, very aware of safeguarding, and we make sure that everything is a safe zone. For those who want to be a little more physically active, then we can cater for them, because sometimes you do teach kids who already have a background in martial arts. But then there's other kids who are scared, who are worried, who aren't very confident in themselves. And to go in all guns blazing, putting on locks and screaming at them isn't the way to go. And I fear that somehow, where some people have gone. So that's a barrier I've had to break down. And we're not teaching the kids how to fight.
I think that's absolutely key, and I think what you said is fantastic. It's about that differentiation, being able to read the room, as you've said, and being able to tailor the message you want to deliver to the people, and finding out how or what the best way is to deliver the message that it sinks in. And I really do like that point you've put forward there, Bob. So I think the real key thing to point out from what we've heard so far is that what you're doing is making a big difference, a really big difference, and it's opening up doors to being physically active, but in a purposeful way that's going to be useful going into later life. So my question now is going to be moving towards more people who may be listening to this, want to make a difference, want to move forward as you have, want to help develop the next generation of confident, able, self-aware individuals that don't go looking for fights, but go looking to be confident and go forward to looking to be able to navigate life in a purposeful way. So, sorry, I digress. Back to my main question, and my question is going to be, what advice would you give to someone who maybe wanted to do the same as what you're doing, wanted to kind of move forward and deliver self-defense classes to the next generation?
I think, you touched on Simon Sinek and start with the why. I think you have to know why you're doing it. I mean, we are a business, so an outcome of driving a good business is income, but that doesn't happen unless you serve people first. So the first thing you have to do is be attendee or delegate driven. What value am I going to give to these kids? What outcomes do I want these kids to have at the end? Another thing that you'll need to do, is have, marketing skills. You have to be able to to talk with decision makers, senior leadership teams, and and people like that. So you have to be confident in yourself, you have to be confident in your knowledge, and you have to be confident in the outcome. Because when someone engages with my services, all they really want is the outcome, and that's safe and confident kids.
Hey, thank you for touching on some of the advice for the younger generation if they wanted to follow in your steps, about having a clear goal to serve people first, and having marketing skills that are being able to persuade others of the outcome is valuable. When you're dealing with students, so what sort of skills and attitudes do people sort of need to be able to teach students?
Okay, well, there's no cookie cutter approach to teaching students, because I have 2 daughters and I don't want to be contentious, but girls are dialed in. Man, they're dialed in and they listen. Boys tend to just want to throw hands, and fight like it's a fight club. Girls will normally listen. So you have to. So if you've got, a mixed group, then you have to realize that you're teaching to a mixed group and things aren't going to go as smoothly. And in mixed groups, girls will act differently around boys and boys will act differently around girls. And then if you have an all-female group, an all-woman group, then some of them may have had previous history. They may have been abused, or they may have domestic violence issues. So you just have to be really, really careful about not coming on too strong. And you have to make sure that your language isn't aggressive or is going to inflame any emotions or bring them back to or trigger them or bring them back to a point in their life when things weren't going right for them. So was that the question you wanted, Travis? Was that okay? Did I answer that?
Yeah, I'm going to talk on Travis's behalf because he's gone frozen again. No, that answers it perfectly. I mean, I really like the importance you're putting down on the who as well as the why. So we're all very familiar with Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, the why, how, and what. But a lot of people we've spoken to are very much now saying that the who is just as important as the why. And I love that you've touched on that, because if we don't know who we're teaching, then how do we know why we're teaching them? So it's really important to understand those things. And I love that you've picked up on, the importance of being able to gauge what we teach, what we instruct, or what we deliver to the room, to the individuals we're teaching it to. Because as you said, the worst thing we want to do is when we're teaching people to develop their confidence is bring that confidence down through triggering the wrong emotion, the wrong memory. So thank you for highlighting that, Bob. So what I'd like to move on to then is what's next. So we've heard about what's happened before. We've heard about what you're doing now. What's next for you, Bob? What's next for your career, for your business? What do you see happening in the next 5-10 years?
I did say one of the most important things in any business is marketing. And I feel like by calling myself Kent Self-Defense Workshops, I kind of closed down the rest of the country and the rest of the world. So perhaps at some point a transition into a broader name to enable people to understand we're just not Kent.
So we're going to end up with lots of franchises, are we, Bob? We're going to have Manchester self-defense class, Liverpool self-defense class, Northampton self-defense class.
Yeah, that's it. So that will have to be a change there in branding. But I think the most important thing is realizing how many resources are out there, because everything I teach, I didn't invent. Now, I don't suggest nobody, in fact, if you take anything from this, nobody go on YouTube for self-defense tips, because that's a wormhole that will just lead to pain. Don't do that. You want to be taught self-defense by an instructor who knows what they're doing. But none of the stuff that I do is new. It's not groundbreaking. It's not my own stuff. I've learned this. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I've had older martial artists, clued up martial artists, ex-military men, close protection, ex-door staff, and I've amalgamated. It's not Krav Maga. It's not karate. It's I'm not as pretentious to say it's its own style, but I've just nicked things that work and I put them together. The future for me is, I know within 5, 10, 15, 100 miles from my house, there's some really, really clued up, clever, smart martial artists. And for whatever reason, they just don't want to market their services, or they don't want to take the leap into teaching these sorts of things full time. So what I want, in effect, going forward, is to leverage those people's skills and those people's very particular skills. And I will set up a connective of martial artists. I will do the marketing for them. I will get them into schools. I will get them into businesses, and they teach. And it will be a network of martial artists providing safety, and teaching business owners, teaching schools and teaching individuals how to be safe.
That's fantastic to hear. I like the idea of building that network of instructors, teaching not only kind of the basics of martial arts, but also, as you say, the understanding, the marketing, and it sounds very exciting. You might get a few phone calls after this interview with maybe individuals wanting to be involved, which would be fantastic. So moving on, Bob, what we do like to do near the end of these conversations, these interviews, is ask a few little fun questions. Try and get a kind of bit of a sense of your personality and kind of go beyond your professional expertise. And the question I tend to ask a lot of the people, or anyone who comes onto these podcasts, kind of draws out how you might have used your skills, your natural born skills, or your learned skills in a different way, in a different career path. So my question is, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, if you weren't involved in instructing martial arts, what other profession do you think you might have found yourself in?
That's a tough one, and I don't think I can answer that. I will tell you what I've done before. For 10 years, I was a zookeeper, and I was an elephant trainer. So I used to train Asian elephants in all sorts of different behaviours, medical behaviours, etc. So that was a really, really fun time in my life. But without sounding twee, I'm living the dream. I'm in my home. It's there's a bit of a heat wave in the UK at the moment. I've got some clients later on. I'm lining up clients for after the school break. But if I had a magic stick and I could be any career, man, I just don't know. I just don't know. Probably a teacher. Probably a teacher.
I'm absolutely loving the fact that you were a zookeeper, an elephant trainer. That's fantastic. I've got to ask the question, and I'm sure everyone listening has got to ask the same question. Are there any similarities to teaching elephants as there are to teaching children?
Elephants are smarter.
Yes. I can see that.
That's great. I have heard the story that elephants have very long memories, so maybe that also helps. I also have a question. What is a strange habit or skill that you have that has helped you on your journey? I
think being 5'6" and not looking like a martial artist. I was, before COVID, I was about 65 kilograms. Now I'm around about 73. But when I go into a business or a school or do a private workshop, and I talk about using techniques for size against size and strength disparity, I eat my own dog food. You wouldn't look at me and think that bloke's a dangerous weapon. I'm not saying that I am, but I have enough skill and intent behind me to be able to walk away from any situation. So I think in many ways that's kind of my superpower. By looking, I call all my students invisible weapons, or concealed weapons, because to look at them you wouldn't think they're up to much, but put them under duress and stress and they just transform. Who can demand a 3-second window escape and get to safety. So maybe that's my superpower, man. Maybe it's because I don't look like a martial artist and I'm 52 years old. Maybe that's it.
Hey, that is a really cool skill and something that you can recognize that is like your superpower. It's not obvious, and it's about turning what some people might say as a weakness into your strength and using that strength to sort of launch your career. I've really enjoyed the conversation that we've had today about how you go about impacting others and creating value within the community by making it safer and more confident for the students to be able to handle dangerous situations. So, Bob, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Tavis.
Yeah, Bob, I'd like to just echo what Tavis said. It's been a real kind of a pleasure interviewing you today and hearing your story. I don't think I've ever met someone who's trained elephants before, so I'm very pleased to have finally met someone who's trained elephants before. But also, I'm very privileged to have had the opportunity to speak to someone who clearly loves what they do and has clearly made a big difference in the community. So on behalf of anyone listening and anyone you've helped, Bob, thank you ever so much.